Hi, and welcome to another edition of One-on-One. I'm Rich Wells, the Public Information Officer for the City of Glendale. Well, warm weather usually means increased demand for water. However, this year, Southern Californians, including Glendale residents, are being asked to conserve their water use. The Glendale City Council recently took action which will restrict landscape watering to 3 days a week. Here today to tell us more about the water shortage and what Glendale residents can do to conserve water is Peter Kavounas, Assistant General Manager for Glendale Water and Power. Peter, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Rich. It's always a pleasure to be with you on the program.
Now, before we talk about water conservation, Peter, tell me a little bit about your position at GWP.
The position, Rich, is my job is to make sure that there's enough water for the city of Glendale and that we have a good system to deliver it to everybody that lives here. So to do that, I manage the people and all the resources that we have in the water department at GWP.
Now, in addition to your duties at GWP, you also were recently appointed to the Metropolitan Water District Board of Directors, correct?
That's correct. Metropolitan Water District is the wholesaler that provides water to all of Southern California and is governed by a board of 37 directors. Glendale has a seat on that board, and the seat until recently was filled by Jim Rez, a former city manager for the city of Glendale. Jim was on that board for almost 21 years and did a marvelous job representing the city and influencing the board to make decisions that were good, not just for Southern California, but also for Glendale, and to make sure there's enough water and that that organization is managed well.
Now, how much of our water do we receive from MWD?
We get about two-thirds, about 65, sometimes 70% of our water from Metropolitan Water District.
Peter, how many customers does GWP serve?
We serve almost all the city of Glendale, so about 210,000 customers. In terms of service connections, we have about 33,000 water connections. I should point out that the electric connections are different, and we have 83,000 electric connections, and that's because, for the most part, apartments are metered separately for electric, whereas for the most part, water meters are master metered for apartment buildings.
Now, how much water does an average customer use, let's say, in a month, in a year?
A typical single-family home uses about 550 gallons per day, if you can believe it. That seems like a large number.
It does.
And when you stop to think about it, all the water that we use is mostly for outdoor irrigation. Our sprinklers put out a lot of water on the grass before we even know it. The other uses add up as well, but not as much as the outside. So 550 gallons a day. In terms of what we measure, our meters measure in 100 cubic feet, so a typical home uses about 2,200 cubic feet per month.
Per month?
Yeah.
Okay. Peter, let's get back to the conservation issue. All of California is looking at a water shortage. Why is that?
There's a number of reasons, and some of them go way back in the history of California. One of the main reasons is that the State Water Project, where the main conveyance from the north to the south, was never really completed. What was missing was a facility that would take potable water and route it around the Sacramento and San Joaquin River Delta. So the system was left incomplete. Actually, that went to a vote of the people, whether that should be built or not, and the people of California voted that down. So today, water runs through that delta, and that delta is a series of canals and levees with a lot of fish living in it, and water getting pulled for agriculture and water being used for environmental purposes as well. After it goes through that very slow-moving part of California, then the water gets into the State Water Project and comes down to Southern California. The inefficiencies in that system and the need to protect the environment in that system, in a very delicate system, have made it so that there's less and less water available for Southern California. The environmental regulations that were recently enforced through lawsuits protect fish species like the Delta smelt and make the window of time during which we can bring water to Southern California narrower and narrower. We can't just take water whenever we want it. Now there's a window of about 3 months of the year where we can ship water here without any restriction at all. So there's part of it is the need to protect the environment. Part of it is the environmental related lawsuits that have enforced those regulations. And, not the least, is the fact that the last 3 years have been normal or below normal in rainfall.
Right.
So all three of these things combined have added up to a supply that's been much less than we needed. So we've depleted water from storage. We have a lot of reservoirs in the state, but we've had to draw from those. This year, was fairly normal in terms of rainfall. Actually, we got a little extra rainfall than we thought we would in late April and early May. And so we did better than we thought we were going to do at the beginning of the year, but we still end up having to take net water out of storage.
Right.
So next year, the situation could be even worse. So we're all hoping that we'll get plenty of rain this winter and that's coming.
Well, I wanted to ask you your thoughts. How long do you think this shortage is going to last?
Well, from the facilities point of view, Rich, it's going to take us, even if we were to go forward with building a facility today to take water around the delta, that'll take at least 10 years to build it. So the difficulties in exporting water will remain for at least 10 years is my prediction. Now, what happens with rainfall is anybody's guess.
Right. Now, earlier this year, GWP asked customers to try to conserve, cut back about 10%. How did we do with that?
We did very well. Glendale as a whole did very well. The actual savings compared to 2006 was only 6%. And we were hoping for 10%, but the last year, 2008 in particular, was much hotter and drier than 2006. So while the number didn't quite match up, I think Glendale residents are to be commended because it was clear that there was a response to the call for voluntary. And I always expected that. You probably heard me at City Council meetings saying that. I expected that Glendale would respond, and sure enough, the residents did quite well.
Now, the City Council did recently implement Phase 2, mandatory water conservation. What does this mean?
What this means, for the most part, is that people that have single-family homes, anybody that's irrigating outside, commercial properties as well, need to irrigate only on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. In addition to that restriction, there's a whole host of no water waste provisions, and one of them is that people cannot water their yards between the hours of 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. So between those two, the main restriction is that people can only water Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays, after 6 at night or before 9 in the morning.
Well, and we should mention, Peter, that one of the reasons the council took this action is because landscaping makes up a great deal of the water use in our community. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Probably 50 to 60% of all the water that GWP provides to the city is used for outdoor landscaping.
Now, are other cities also implementing water restrictions with their customers?
Very much so. Every city, every municipality in Southern California is doing very much what Glendale is doing. We've actually been in very close contact with our neighbors, Pasadena, Burbank. They're doing the same thing. They've restricted outdoor irrigation to 3 days a week as well, and it's the same 3 days as Glendale, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And other cities have done perhaps a little more strict. They've gone to 2 days a week. We believe that for our unique situation in the foothill region, Burbank, Pasadena, Glendale, all together, we believe that 3 days a week is going to do the job.
Now, I know you have a very big public outreach effort going on to help inform and educate the customers here in Glendale. Peter, let's talk about what people can do to cut back on their water use.
You know, the customers in Glendale are going to be the most critical link in achieving conservation. In addition to managing the way they use water at home, reducing their landscape irrigation to 3 days a week, people need to be aware of all the ways that they use water inside the house and outside the house. We've talked before about not letting the water run when people brush their teeth or shave. That still remains the case. People living in apartments can do that and also pitch in. And also be aware of the water use, not only in their home, but also in the whole community. If they see water running down the street, give GWP a call, give us a chance to look into it, and perhaps there's a broken pipe, perhaps there's a leak of some sort, that if it's fixed, can help us conserve water altogether. So be vigilant, be aware, and use water wisely when you have control.
Well, and I've heard about the no water waste policy. Is that part of what you're talking about?
Exactly. There's a number of actions people are not allowed to take in the city of Glendale, and it's all intended to promote good, wise use of water. Some of those actions are, for example, fix a leaking pipe within 72 hours. Well, that makes sense not only from water wasting point of view, but from a homeowner's point of view as well. Don't wash your driveway with water. Use a broom to sweep it. Don't water so much that there's water running off of the yard onto the sidewalk. When washing a car, use a hose that has
Right.
a shutoff valve, the kinds that look like a little pistol, and use a bucket to use less water altogether. We're asking restaurants not to serve water unless their customers ask for it. We're asking hotels to post the no water waste policy and give their customers a chance to reuse towels and linens. It's altogether meant to promote a water efficient use mentality through the city.
Now, I know this next issue has come up for discussion quite a bit. There's been a lot of talk about it, and that is the use of artificial turf. And I understand some people want to take out their grass and they want to put artificial turf in. What's the city's policy on that, Peter?
The city's policy is that artificial turf at this time cannot be used on front lawns. Artificial turf can be used in the back. For front lawns, people can use California native plants, which use considerably less water, and they're very beautiful.
Now, the city, however, may be reviewing that whole issue. Is that correct?
That is correct, and actually the city will be testing different kinds of artificial grass in the back of City Hall. They will be installing different types to see how they look and how they feel and how they function over time.
Now, some customers might say, Peter, that because I am restricted in my water use and my landscaping, my grass is beginning to turn brown. Are people allowed to let their grass turn brown?
We're asking people to water their grass 3 days a week, 10 minutes per station. If that means that the grass turns a little brown, and we think it might show a little stress, but we don't think that'll kill the grass. So if a lawn turns brown because of inadequate watering on those 3 days a week, the city's policy on landscape ordinance allows for an exception. And so the city will not be enforcing landscape ordinance requirements if the problem comes from using less water.
So if I have an automatic sprinkler system, I should try to set each station to 10 minutes or less. Is that correct?
That's correct. And actually a very good approach that we recommend is setting a station to go off twice during the day at 5 minutes each time. That allows the first pass of water to soak in instead of letting the water run off the yard.
Now that same philosophy would apply to someone who uses a hose and a traditional sprinkler that you put down on the grass. You can only go into that part of the landscaping for 10 minutes and then you move it to the next spot. Is that correct?
That's correct. Hand watering is considered the same as sprinkler irrigation. It's not as efficient and we don't recommend it, but we would recommend to people to not do it for more than 10 minutes at a spot of the yard.
Peter, what are the consequences if the city of Glendale does not cut back on its water use?
The way the arrangement with the Metropolitan Water District is, if we end up buying more water than we're allowed from Metropolitan, we'll end up paying very, very high penalties. And those penalties will be spread, unfortunately, to all the customers because of the way our rate structure is. And so the effort to conserve is not only to avoid paying the penalties, but also to live by the right ethic, which is we're all in Southern California, we're all in this together, we all need to do our part.
Well, and that's a very important point, Peter, because if the city as a whole does not cut back on its water use, there could be penalties. Those in turn would have to be passed along to the customers. So it's really important for everybody to take this seriously and to try to do as much as they can to cut back on their water use.
Very much so. Even those that don't have a landscape to manage need to do their part. Otherwise, we face the possibility of penalties, and our preliminary estimate is that we could pay as much as $2 to $3 million in penalties, and would really like to avoid that. We need everybody's help to avoid that.
Well, especially during these very difficult economic times, true?
Exactly so, Rich.
Well, Peter, I want to talk a little bit more about water conservation and some other issues that are coming up in the near future, but we're going to take a break first. We'll be back with more one-on-one right after this.
Glendale, it's time to save water. We are currently experiencing one of the driest seasons on record. Yet this dry season can serve as an opportunity for all of us to take part in water conservation. Just by making minor changes outdoors in the way we use water can save gallons of water a day. For example, position sprinklers so that the water lands on the lawn and shrubs, not on sidewalks or driveways. Step on your grass. If it springs back, you don't need to water. Water when temperatures are cooler. Sweep driveways and sidewalks instead of hosing them. Use a bucket and shut-off nozzle on the hose when washing your car. Saving water is simple. Working together, we can achieve our water conservation goal to reduce water usage by 10%. That's about 20 gallons of water per person a day.
After 8 years of research and planning, the Bob Hope Airport has submitted a proposal seeking to ban nighttime operations. The FAA's final ruling on this proposal, called a Part 161 study, will be made by November the 1st. We are now in the FAA's 30-day public comment period, the community's opportunity to communicate its desire for a mandatory nighttime curfew. Contact your elected officials in Washington and the FAA in support of the airport's curfew proposal.
We have a water shortage. So why do we continue to waste water? With leaky sprinklers, or by hosing down our driveways instead of sweeping them, and by taking anything longer than a 5-minute shower. Southern California is getting drier. Go to BeWaterWise.com, find out how your community is dealing with mandatory conservation, and learn 6 things we can all do to move the needle.
Mom!
Hi, and welcome back to One-on-One. Today we're talking with Peter Kavounas, who is the Assistant General Manager for Water for Glendale Water and Power. Peter, we've been talking up till now about water conservation and water shortages and things of that nature. I would like to ask now, how are people in apartments and condominiums affected by this? Obviously, they don't have the landscaping, but they too need to conserve water.
Absolutely. Everybody that uses water in the city of Glendale needs to do their part to conserve. And in some cases, the people in apartments do have some control over the water use, whether it's the landscaping or other perhaps water features in their apartment complex. So they need to, once again, be aware and use water as wisely as they can.
If a apartment unit or the apartment complex overuses their water, what happens in a situation like that?
Ultimately, the customer that holds the account in their name is who's responsible. The city's approach is to be very reasonable. We're asking for everybody to do their part. Please do your part and conserve is the message we're trying to get out to people. In some cases, when people go against the ordinance and the prohibitions that are put in place by the ordinance, they'll get a notice from GWP saying, you know, you were doing something and here's what it was that you did that was not appropriate. In a few cases, I imagine there's going to be those that continue to violate the ordinance, and those cases would result in a citation from the city's Neighborhood Services Department. But we're hoping, and again asking everybody to help work with us on this, that a simple notice, a simple reminder by GWP would help them understand what it is they're not doing correctly and then change it.
Well, and as you said, Peter, this is a learning process for everybody, and of course the city wants to be reasonable whenever these situations arise, correct?
Absolutely. The last thing we want to do is go around fining people for wasting water. What we'd really like to do is people just get the message from the outreach that we're conducting, and we're putting out a lot of information for people to learn what it is they can do to help.
Now, if there's somebody who maybe hasn't gotten the message or they don't realize that their water is being wasted, maybe it's going over onto the sidewalk, maybe down the gutter, whatever it might be. If somebody wants to report somebody who might be wasting water, what should they do?
Well, there's many different ways to report waste of water. There's probably the simplest way is to call the hotline that we've established. The number for that is 818-550-4426, 550-4426. And that allows people, without necessarily leaving their name if they don't want to, simply report an incident that they've noticed. They can also go to our website, that's glendalewaterandpower.com, and leave the information there also anonymously. Now what we do when we get a call like that is we don't automatically issue a ticket. Mm-hmm. We take that as a note that there might be a problem at that location. We'd probably send a notice to the customer saying there might be a problem, and would send somebody out to look at it and see, and if it is a problem, maybe have a conversation or send another reminder with a customer that's there.
Well, and I know you've used examples in some meetings that I've been in where somebody's on vacation and they don't realize that their sprinklers are running or they're running on the wrong time of the day, and so consequently it's just a situation where the owner of the property didn't realize that they were wasting water.
Absolutely. And in that case, it's essential for the neighbors to tell us, because then we have an opportunity to help and protect a property from major damage.
Peter, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about recycled water, because I know the city has a very extensive recycled watering program. Can you talk about that and how that's been useful to the city?
I'm glad you asked that, Rich. Recycled water is a source of about 5% of the water that the city uses. Recycled water is water that reaches the treatment plant as wastewater, and then is treated to a very high level, and then it's used to irrigate, for the most part, irrigate lawns throughout the city. We have a large golf course that is on recycled water. Many of the city medians are on recycled water. City parks, a cemetery in town is on recycled water. Actually, 2 cemeteries in town are on recycled water. And that helps make more potable water available for residents. So it's a very good program. We've grown it to be about 5% of our total demand, and would really like to grow the program even more. The challenge with recycled water is that it's expensive to build new facilities. At the same time, the price for potable water is increasing, and so it's making recycled water look more viable. At this time, the city has about 20 miles of pipe. We have 5 storage tanks for recycled water, and we have 6 pump stations. So it's a pretty good size operation. It takes quite a bit of our focus in our operation of the system to get it to run, and also we have to manage it to meet certain water quality criteria. So it's a pretty involved operation. We really hope to expand it. And you might find it interesting to know that the city code requires all commercial buildings in the city of Glendale to be dual plumbed. So when recycled water becomes available to them at a later time, they can just connect and then start using recycled water for the appropriate uses, which would be mostly toilet flushing and other uses like that is non-contact.
Well, and we should mention, just recently the City Council approved some action which is going to allow us to bring recycled water to the athletic fields at our local schools, correct?
Yes, we're very hopeful. We're going to be applying for a grant. If we are successful in getting the grant, we'll be able to expand the recycled water and irrigate the complex of Hoover, Toll, and Keppel schools. So with a single extension of the system, we can cover 3 schools. And we're very excited about that prospect. We think it would be wonderful.
And again, as we expand the recycled water project, Peter, it really cuts down on our need to import more water from the MWD, right?
Absolutely. Every drop of recycled we use offsets a drop of potable and makes our potable more reliable for everybody else to use.
And one other source, we do have some water wells that are still functioning, correct?
Yes, and we pay a lot of attention to our wells. We need to keep them running at all times, and the more water we produce from the ground, the less water, again, we have to buy from MWD. So we have a big focus on maintaining the pumps and the motors that run those wells. We keep spares on hand as we need to, and we make sure that our operators are trained and ready to go if anything goes wrong.
So Peter, when you add all these things together, Glendale really is being proactive when it comes to water conservation. You have, of course, our water wells, which you just talked about, the recycled water program, and of course the public outreach you're doing right now to help educate people about water conservation. What are some of the things that you're offering to help people cut down on their water usage, Peter?
Rich, we're very happy to make customers aware not only of the need to conserve, but also of ways to conserve. So we've produced a number of materials that have been mailed to customers' homes, including the latest edition of The Source, which customers should have received in the last week. And The Source has a great number of tips, along with explaining the situation that brought about the need to conserve. We have classes that are available for people to learn not only, again, the basics about water, but also the basics about landscaping. We'll call those Water 101.
Right.
And that's a very well-attended program. It's gaining in popularity, and we're also sharing that program with citizens of Burbank, so we can have the same class at a little more efficient offering. We also have information on our website, GlendaleWaterandPower.com, and we also direct people to a website that is all about water. The website is bewaterwise.com, and that website is sponsored by the Metropolitan Water District. The last thing I'd like to mention is that we offer free home surveys that target not only water but also electric use in the home. If a customer would call and make a reservation, our technicians would go out there, would work with the customer to help them understand how water is used, how electricity is used in their home, and how it could be used better.
Well, and I have heard a lot of positive comments about that program, Peter. So there are a number of things that are in place right now to help the residents. I would like to mention that coming up in the future, we're looking at some new and different things, in particular the smart meter and the technology that comes with that whole concept. Can you talk about the smart meter?
Absolutely. We're very excited. That's going to be the largest project we take on in Glendale Water and Power. It'll affect, again, both water and electric. And it's an interesting concept. The meters themselves are not smart. The meters are traditional meters that are used in water and electric industry. What makes them smart is technology that's added to the meters. And so for electric meters, for example, a customer will get information in their home that's telling them how much electricity they're using. They'll also get information that relates to the cost of electricity, because electricity will eventually be sold at different rate at different times of the day. So customers will have the ability, the convenience, to make choices about how they use electricity and how much they pay, ultimately resulting in conservation. Same thing as water. Customers will be able to get a really good understanding of how much water they use around the house, and they'll be able to control that a little bit better and conserve. Ultimately, we'd like to be able to give customers a phone call to let them know that our system is saying that they might have a leak in their home. Now, we think that's good customer service, and we're looking forward to that. The system ultimately collects the information on usage, water and electric usage, and transmits it to the GWP customer service group, which can then process the billing. And that will result in efficiencies and cost savings for the utility, which ultimately is good for the customer.
And we should mention that Glenn Steiger, the general manager, and you and the other members of GWP have done extensive research on the smart meters, the technology that goes with it. It really has been tested quite a bit throughout the country, is that correct?
It has, and it's been proven to work, especially electric systems have been proven to work to the great benefit of customers and the utilities that serve them. So we're not by any means on the bleeding edge of this. This is tried and true, and again, we're working with some very good folks from the industry and looking forward to a very successful implementation. We think the program, Rich, is going to start in the early 2010. We're going to do a pilot, and we're going to install about 500 water meters and about 1,000 electric meters. That will be our pilot, and after that's given a chance to run to see how it works, make sure all the bugs are taken out, then we're going to go citywide, and we expect by the year 2011 we'll have the system deployed throughout the city. We'll treat it like any other large project where there's plenty of information that's given to the customer so they know what to expect. Any concerns they may have are addressed, and they get information all along the way.
Well, that's exciting, and it's right around the corner.
It's coming, and we're all very happy about it.
Well, Peter, that sounds very exciting, and maybe we'll have to check back with you in 2010 and see how things are going with the new system. So let's take a look now at what's going on. We do have a Phase 2. Mandatory water conservation is in place. And again, if you could repeat for us what those conservation efforts are and what you're hoping that the customers will be able to do.
The primary effort that we're asking customers to make is to limit their irrigation to 3 days a week. 3 days a week being Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And we're asking them to water their yards for 10 minutes per station, after 6 o'clock at night, and before 9 o'clock in the morning on those 3 days of the week. We're asking people also to be aware and conscious of the way they use water in and around the house, and also to call us to let us know if they see water being wasted so that we can follow up and find out what the problem might be and help cure it. We think altogether we can easily save 10% of the use that we had back in 2004, 5, 6, which is what we're being measured against. We think we can easily save that 10%. Asking for voluntary conservation, people on their own gave us 6% in spite of hot and drier weather conditions. So we think that with this additional guidance to water only 3 days a week, we're easily going to get the 10%. We do need people to keep it in mind. We do need people to try their best to get there, to avoid the penalties that we would have to pay if we didn't do that. And ultimately, we'll get there. My biggest concern is that next year, if weather doesn't cooperate, might be the same or might be worse. So while I'm very positive, very upbeat about our ability to conserve the 10% this year, I want to put a caution with our viewers that next year we may have to continue the effort. Just doing it this year may not be enough. And from our perspective, we like to supply people with water. We know it's a big part of their life. It supports a quality of life that we think people deserve. And it's difficult for us to ask people to cut back, but necessary if we're going to have enough. We're still mindful of the future. If next year doesn't rain as much, or even if it does rain a normal amount, we may have to continue or call for even more cutbacks. So it's very important for people to help us. The less water we use today, the less water we'll pull out of storage, and our chances of managing the future are better and better.
Well, let's hope we get a lot of rainfall during the winter time.
Certainly hope so.
So, Peter, if people do want more information on what they can do, we encourage them to look at the Source newsletter. Of course, City View's newsletter will be coming out with more information on that. You have your website. There will be public service announcements here on Channel 6. I believe you're also going to be putting advertisements in local newspapers.
Absolutely.
So folks should look for all of those. If they do have questions, they can always give you a call and find out more about it.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you, Peter, for joining us today, and it's been educational for me, and I'm sure it has been for our audience, and I want to wish you the best of luck in the coming year.
Thank you, Rich. It's always a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
And I want to thank you for joining us for another edition of One on One. We'll see you next time.